And so again, I think we need to connect the dots between the economic pain people are feeling right now and the choices our government makes around how we will spend our financial resources,
Hmm.
right? You mad about paying $5 at the pump? You mad about your eggs? Me too. I wonder why, right? These are our new economic realities, right?
Welcome back to Grub and Grace, where we take the keep it light rule, gently set it on the fire, and ask harder questions instead. Today's episode is about a few small, totally casual topics: Palestine, Zionism, colonialism, empire, white supremacy. Easy dinner table conversation. Because somehow in 2026, we're still living in a world where calling for justice gets framed as controversial, but symptoms of domination get rebranded as complicated. Where history isn't just written by winners, it's actively edited, sanitized, and then handed back to us like we shouldn't notice what's missing. So, we're digging into the stories we're told, the power structures behind them, and what it actually means to pursue justice in a world that keeps redefining the word to suit itself. So if you've ever felt like the narrative doesn't quite add up, you're in the right place. And thankfully, I'm not doing that alone. I'm joined by Reverend Naomi Washington-Leapheart, a daughter of Detroit, who is a black queer preacher, teacher, movement strategist, and justice advocate. She is an adjunct professor of theology and religious studies at Villanova University and also serves as the first ever strategic partnership director at Political Research Associates, the PRA, a social justice research and strategy center that provides strategic insights and actionable research that identifies, disrupts, and competes with movements and institutions that undermine democracy, justice, and human rights. In 2021, Reverend Naomi founded Salt, Yeast, Light, an organization that develops spaces for spiritual education, disruption, reflection, transformation, and public action. Naomi serves as the board of chair of Pride in the Pews and also a member of the board of SIECUS, SIECUS. Additionally, she serves on the Faith Advisory Council of Americans United for Separation of Church and State and volunteers her time with Christians for a Free Palestine. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Mark. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, and would you mind telling our listeners a little bit more about yourself if I missed anything?
Well, I like to think of my vocation as offering a hug and a push, whether I am in kind of traditional religious settings, in a pulpit, in a congregation, or whether I'm in a room with a bunch of movement strategists who are trying to figure out how to intervene in the religious nationalism that we're seeing not only in the US but all around the globe. My work is to provide grace and compassion and solidarity, to be a pastor in any room I'm in. That's the hug. And also to push us, to invite us to confront our assumptions, confront our the limitations of our perspectives, to confront apathy and indifference, to push us over into freedom. Because sometimes we need help getting to freedom. So everything that I'm doing, whether it's in the Villanova classroom or again in a pulpit or walking alongside faith leaders, or whether it's organizing on movement front lines or doing strategy in closed rooms with movement leaders, that's what I'm trying to bring. That's what I feel I'm called to do. And I feel really honored that I have been able to learn from and be mentored by activists, organizers, faith leaders, regular everyday people who have shown me what it means to be faithful and what it means to do justice. And so I'm just trying to be accountable to those who taught me. I'm trying to, um, you know, be faithful to what I feel compelled to do and what I feel skilled and gifted to do. And you know, again, I'm just grateful that I get to do this not only for my life but to make a living.
Mm.
Uh,
Well, I'm grateful for you too, and like grateful for all the content that you put out there too, because I first found you on, I think it was Instagram. There was a video about, I think you had kicked it off and gave an intro for another pastor or another leader talking about, I think it was Genesis. It was the creation story, Genesis 1 and 2,
Genesis. Uh-huh.
the two creation stories, I should say, but
Uh-huh.
how that is reworked for Zionism, and he was kind of debunking some of the ways that it's used to help the transnational class with Zionism and everything like that. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and I've watched some of your other videos and seen some of your other content, and you leave a good imprint on society. I feel like you've been doing some really good work, and so I thank you for everything you've been doing.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to know somebody's out there. You're talking to the camera and hoping
Exactly.
somebody will listen. So thank you so much for taking what we're trying to say seriously. So yeah.
That's one thing I'm always wondering on my show too. I'm like, who is there anyone actually listening?
Anybody, hello, Bueller, anybody? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, you've been involved with Christians for a Free Palestine. What was the moment or experience that like first made the Palestinian liberation a theological issue for you, like not just a political one?
hmm Well, I was in seminary, preparing to be a Christian pastor, minister, was already pretty transformed in that seminary was where I learned that the gospel is, in fact, a political proposition, a political claim, right? It's not just about spiritual wholeness. It's not just about, salvation in the kind of traditional sense. It's also about remaking the world, right? So I was already pretty kind of radicalized in that way. But in my last year of seminary, uh, well, actually, it wasn't my last year of seminary, my second year of seminary, I was due to take my cross cultural experience. Our seminary required students to engage in a cross cultural exchange and then, of course, write and reflect about that and what implications that experience would have for ministry. And the school offered cross cultural experiences like organized by the school. And then people did independent cross cultural experiences. Well, it just so happened that the year I was to do my cross cultural experience, the school chose Israel Palestine as the location of our cross cultural experience. So that meant that I got to take a semester long course on Palestine. And, you know, the designer of the syllabus for that course is a person, a Christian leader who is deeply involved in the Palestine Solidarity Movement. And so that meant the syllabus was curated in a particular way, right?
Mm.
We were reading Edward Said, we were reading Palestinian thinkers, historians, artists, right? So intellectually, my understanding of Palestine was shaped by reading Palestinians, by reading Palestinian Christians, Palestinian Muslims, etc. But then we got to go to Palestine.
Mhm.
This was in 2014. We spent a little more than 2 weeks in Palestine. Again, the itinerary created by someone who is deeply invested in the Palestine solidarity struggle. And so, it wasn't just about, walking where Jesus walked, as it were, right? We did visit some of these sites where Christians by the thousands make pilgrimage every year. But
Mhm.
we also went to refugee camps and we went to, Bethlehem Bible College and sat at the feet of Palestinian theologians. And we, visited the Ramallah meeting house where we met Jean Zaru, a woman who's leading the Quaker congregation there. So we had this thoroughly, thoroughly transforming experience. I could not be the same human being, never mind the same kind of Christian,
No, it seemed
coming
like,
back
yeah.
from that experience. It also was striking that the group that went, we were a majority Black group.
Mhm.
And so we were able to make explicit some of these connections between the Palestinian experience of occupation and apartheid and the Black American experience, or really the Black diasporic experience of colonization, enslavement, exploitation, segregation, all of the things. And so I had even more connection to the Palestinian fight, because how can you not when you understand the relationship between the sort of apartheids and genocides that have kind of tainted American soil, North American soil, and the ongoing occupation and apartheid going on in Palestine. So that was the formative experience, matching head, heart, and body, right? Like I intellectually got it. We read all the things, we studied the scholarship, but being there um, shaped how I walk in the world. So I have been involved in Palestinian solidarity activity since then, since 2014. You know, fortunately, unfortunately, because of the raging nature of Israeli apartheid, 2023 presented a new opportunity to engage Christians specifically
Mm-hmm.
in better understanding what's going on and how Christianity is implicated. So this is a renewed work that started for me in 2014.
That's awesome. I wish I would have woken up that early to everything.
Mm,
2023 was very impactful for me.
sure.
And you know, like you said, it was impactful for many people, not just Christians, but many people around the
Hmm.
world.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of people were doing a lot of self research to understand what was going on, just because this blew up and became such a big issue. It's not that it became an issue then, but it was like to them in their world.
Sure.
In
Yep.
my world, it became an issue. And
Yep.
so I think in that sense, it was good. Obviously, it was atrocious and awful what had happened since then. But, you know, I'm glad that it's waking people up,
Hmm.
and not just to Palestinians, but it's opening up conversation to like capitalism. It's opening like the transnational capitalist class, the Epstein class. Like you get all this larger story conversation, and like you said, how it relates to like Black liberation movements and the history of America and the world also at large, of everything with that too. So I think it's really cool that you got that experience to go over there and check that out also.
Hmm. Hmm.
You did mention that Christians, and obviously we're both Christian. And my other question was that some Christians believe supporting Palestinian freedoms means being anti Israel or anti Jewish.
Hmm.
How would you respond to that concern in your advocacy and ministry work?
Yeah, it's a significant concern, and I was formed to share that concern, right? I was, unknowingly, unwittingly formed as a Christian Zionist. It seemed like the default way to be, that to be Christian was to automatically and without condition or question support the state of Israel, because of some vague notion that that's what the Bible commanded, right? We didn't know specifically where the Bible commanded it, but there was some vague notion that it was biblical to do so. And there was pressure, everything from what I think is pretty egregious to sort of say, well, Jews marched with Dr. King. So don't you? I mean, there was a little bit of kind of leveraging cultural pressure
Mm.
to suggest that solidarity is mandatory in this kind of transactional way, reciprocal way, right? So I say all that to say I understand the concern, because I was shaped to have that same concern, to be afraid that any critique of a nation state was a critique of Jews in general. I think the approach in answering this concern or addressing this concern has to be multifold, right? On the one hand, there is some re-education that needs to happen about, okay, so what actually does the Bible say? What does the Bible kind of obligate Christians to do, if anything, related to the modern nation state of Israel, right? There's some education, re-education around the notion of biblical Israel and the contemporary modern nation state of Israel. What is the distinction? When Moses is talking about Israel, when God is talking about Israel in the Hebrew Bible, is God talking about the nation state of Israel that we can point to on a map today. So I think re-education is necessary to get people to understand the Bible in its context, and how to read it not as a referendum on contemporary politics, but as a witness of a human experience that is time bound, culturally bound, contextually bound, etc. But I also think that there's another element of our approach that needs to consider the relational, right? When people say, I'm afraid of being construed as an anti-Semite, they're not merely talking about understanding cognitively, intellectually, what is anti-Semitism and what is not anti-Semitism, or what is biblical Israel versus the modern nation state of Israel. They're saying something about their concern about relational harm, relational damage, losing a degree of social capital, right? It's like, I don't ever want to be called a racist. I don't ever want to be called an anti-Semite, right? There's that concern. What will this mean for my ability to be in community with Jewish people, right? So we've got to also address that. And for me, it was having anti-Zionist, non-Zionist Jewish comrades, friends, rabbi friends, right? People in my own life talk to me a bit about the lack of uniformity in Jewish thought about this, right? They helped me to see, oh, Jewish people are not a monolith. Jewish political thought is not a monolith. Jewish, religious, biblical interpretation is not a monolith, right? So I needed people rooted in Jewish tradition to help me understand the complexity of Jewish tradition, the complexity of Jewish perspective, so that I'm not brushing the Jewish community with a broad brush, right? I also needed to know that, oh, there are Jews who are anti-Zionist and who do not construe critique of the state of Israel as anti-Semitic. They've helped me understand that, yes, there is a risk that some relationships might change once I declare my commitment to Palestinian solidarity. But not all relationships will change, right? I can still be in community with Jewish comrades. So I think our approach needs to be twofold. At least we need to attend to the fact that people need to just be retaught and be given an opportunity to wrestle with what they have inherited and this new information, this new content that they've been taught. And they need a chance to talk through their relational concerns, right? Does this mean I'm an anti-Semite? And they need somebody to come in and say, well, let's look at anti-Semitism and what does it mean and how, and let's hear from our Jewish comrades who have varying perspectives about what is anti-Semitic and what is not.
For sure.
So that, I think, is an enduring, sustainable approach to addressing that concern that Christians have.
I love all that. And one thing I would add on too is along with re-educating of what that actually looks like and what these terms kind of, how do we dictate these terms and what do they mean? What do they mean to different people? Is to how to understand where propaganda starts and ends as well, and how that impacts us. And I think it's important for just anything in life, really, to understand propaganda, how it works, how it impacts us, and what to look out for when you're actually looking for that too. But yeah, I think all of these pieces, everything that you said, it all works together. And once you start seeing one aspect of it and you start talking to people about this and having actual conversations, you start to see how a lot of this kind of works together. So yeah, it's interesting and it's kind of revelatory once you actually do start to kind of see some of this. So yeah. And some circles just aren't quite there yet, and that's where we can help them out. So when it comes to like Christian Zionism, the other side of Zionism, where it's, you primarily see it here in America, at least we've been seeing a lot of here in America in these conversations. But how would you define like Christian Zionism versus Zionism in a way that helps people like understand not just its theology, but like political and cultural consequences as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate the way you frame the question to include the fact that Christian Zionism is a political project, just as much as it is a theological one. In fact, we could make an argument that it was first a political project, right?
Mm-hmm.
That needed a certain kind of moral scaffolding to keep it up. And here comes the theological, right? But nevertheless, we can define Christian Zionism in both ways, right? That it is a movement that endorses and promotes Jewish nationalism, usually through the establishment of a Jewish kind of a state, through this Jewish ethno-nationalism, based on a certain kind of interpretation of the Bible. So there is the kind of a biblical infrastructure for Christian Zionism. As we were saying on that video that you got to watch, Genesis 12:3 is one of those critical texts that Christian Zionists use to provide a moral and biblical basis for their Christian Zionism. And Christian Zionism is also a political project. We call it the foreign policy, or the domestic and really foreign policy of Christian nationalism. Right? So if we think of Christian nationalism as a political project to enshrine and codify certain kinds of Christian dogma into law, right? Well, this Christian Zionism is an extension of that. What can we enshrine into policy that is grounded in or morally justified by a religious and theological worldview? So Christian Zionism rejects Palestinian land claims, right? We've heard versions of Christian Zionism that reject the mere existence of Palestinians. So that's a facet of Christian Zionism. Christian Zionism is Islamophobic. It is anti-Muslim. And so it leverages anti-Muslim sentiment and rhetoric and attitudes and fears to pave the way for its political project, which is expressly Christian, right? It ignores, dismisses the reality of Palestinian Christians. This is, again, contributing to the, we're making room for the complete vilification of Palestinian Muslims by ignoring the fact that there are Palestinian Christians. It fetishizes Jews. And so it purports to be in solidarity and in friendship with Jews. But ultimately, if we follow that theological thread all the way to the end, Jews are instruments of a Christian plot. Jews are Jewish folks are instrumentalized as plot devices in this Christian tragedy, right?
Amen.
In
Thanks
order
for saying that.
Yeah, in order to catalyze the end, right? The rapture, the second coming of Jesus, however you want to frame it, we need Jews to do thus and so, right? And then after they do thus and so, they either need to convert to Christianity or they too will face eternal condemnation, right? So it's actually a very anti-Semitic, deeply anti-Semitic project. But it looks like it is a friend of Jews, right? It is in solidarity with Jewish Zionism, right? It bankrolls largely U.S. support for Israeli occupation and apartheid, right? So it seems to be a friend of Israel, a friend of Jews, but Jews face a tragic end if they don't convert at the end of the story. So it's a political project that mandates support for Israel by any means, including violence, which they would call holy and justified, so that violence, that war, that conflict can catalyze the return of Jesus or the apocalypse, the end of times, and ultimately make the whole world Christian. That's the end game, right? So it
Mm-hmm.
is both political and theological. And so, again, we need an approach that dismantles and interrupts the theology and stops, organizes against the political. We need both.
Yeah, it's inextricably tied, and also when you see how much money is poured into bombarding people with this message of we need to
Right.
support Israel at all costs.
Mm-hmm.
They're constantly surrounded by the enemies and
Mm-hmm.
all these surrounding countries and
Mm-hmm.
people that are pushing back against Israel. They just instantly become the enemy. It's whenever anybody pushes back against the imperial machine, the
Right.
Western hegemony and everything, they all of a sudden get labeled as terrorists or the
That's
enemy
right.
that we
That's
need to
right.
vanquish. And Israel is just always this, put on this pedestal on the top of the hill. They need to be protected at all costs when it's
Mm-hmm.
really just an imperial tool to extract and exploit the land and the resources in that region of the world, as
Mm-hmm.
well as squashing any dissent that might come up against Western hegemony in that region of the world as well. So it's
Right.
like you're looking at everything with Iran. I mean, Israel has been a key role in Western powers to try to squash any resistance like
That's
Iran
right.
is putting up a front to doing. So
That's right.
yeah, it's one of those things like people open your eyes
Yeah,
like
and let me say, people, it's easy these days for people to mock and have contempt for evangelical Christianity as kind of the locus of power as it relates to all of these, misguided, and dangerous theological worldviews.
mhm,
But let me say, there is something called liberal Christian Zionism,
mhm,
right? You
mhm.
don't have to be an evangelical
No,
to
you
be
don't.
propping up the Christian Zionist movement
Uh-huh.
under the guise of, well, it's the U.S.'s job to make sure Israel is safe. It's the U.S.'s job to meddle in other people's affairs so that because we're the conveyors of, we're the bringers of democracy, right? There's an argument to be made that liberal folk who see themselves as progressive, see themselves as, on the right side of things, are also contributing to the Christian Zionist ecosystem. So, lest we think in Christianity we are off the hook if we are not evangelical, or
Mhm.
if we are not Trump supporters, or we're not, right?
Uh-huh.
No, because there's a maintenance of Christian Zionism in liberal and progressive Christian spaces as well.
Yeah, and like I've heard it so many times from other people is that liberals are one of the easiest to manipulate.
Mm,
You just throw in some of those keywords like
yeah, yeah,
LGBTQ rights, affordable healthcare, all these things, and
yep.
and they're just like, I'm on board, whatever you want, and then they'll be like, Zionists, let's get back behind Zionists and let's give them, trillions of more dollars, and
Yeah,
they're like, cool, as long as we can get this other stuff, and it's like
yeah. You're right. You're right. You're right.
I mean, we've talked a little bit about how it impacts foreign policy as well as, locally here. But are there any other ways that you can see that Christian Zionism shapes American foreign policy attitudes towards particular the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or anything else around the world or even locally at home
Hmm.
that we haven't covered already?
Uh-huh. Just this notion that there is a such thing as holy or redemptive violence, right? If we believe, and if we listen to the defense secretary, if that's any indication, we really do believe that,
Hmm.
or we listen to Huckabee or to, right, that war is actually could actually be part of God's divine design. Christian Zionism helps people maintain that belief that sometimes God uses violence. So here's what I think. I think that Christian Zionism, confronting Christian Zionism, is an invitation to confront everything. Like you said, imperialism. To what degree has Christianity conflated itself with imperialist dreams, right? That to be blessed, when we say God bless America, what we mean is God has given America the power to dominate over, right? And so if we're imperialists, it's because God blessed us to be, or this is how God is blessing us by giving us the power to export all of the worst things about us to everything else, to everywhere else. So I guess what I'm saying is that Christian Zionism indicates a much broader theological worldview that also keeps other systems of oppression in place, right? So Israel, Palestine, also how we're related to what we call underdeveloped and third world nations, also has to do with how we treat migrants and what our border politics are, right? I think Christian Zionism provides the scaffolding, as I said, to a bunch of other kinds of oppression. And that's why dismantling it, interrupting it is so important. If we can get Christians to untether themselves from the Christian Zionist project, maybe they'll also untether themselves from, the kind of mass incarceration project or the, border, right? Because all of that is implicated. All of that is implicated.
Yeah, and I think I think this whole Epstein thing that's been happening, been blowing up over the last couple of years. I think it has allowed a lot of people within those spaces to reassess their whole belief system as far as how they view things. It has fractured and split a lot of people within this very kind of Christian space as far as, what they might believe, and it's taken some people down very anti-Semitic routes, like actually anti-Semitism, and racism and whatnot. It's brought some other people questioning it, but not really taking it seriously that much, and a lot of people in the middle. And I think that has helped quite a bit. But then you look at like Black liberation theological movements and stuff like that. You mentioned like how it impacts like how we view immigrants and like the incarceration system. Are there any like other ethical or theological implications that could be tying face so closely to like nationalism or state power?
I think the First Amendment, as relates to freedom of religion, to me has always been an unstable principle, right? From the beginning, there's certain kinds of Christian, well, maybe that's what I meant to say, certain kinds of religious traditions that actually get protected and others that may or may not be protected. And so I think the sort of the hardening of Christian supremacy, Christian hegemony, right? That has deep, I think, political implications, both domestically and, I can imagine a world or a United States where not being Christian gets criminalized, right? That's where this road leads, right? People think that they want, Jesus is my savior and Trump is my president. They think they think they want a Christian nation. But what does that mean? Well, that means that if you're not Christian, you need to convert or be otherwise cut off from citizenship, from full political participation, social participation, right? So, that might feel like catastrophizing or something, but I don't think it is, right? If we allow for this, then we'll allow for that, right? And so, I talk to many Christians, well, why wouldn't we want everybody to love Jesus and be a disciple? Well, first of all, no, but secondly, what does that mean for who gets to decide what kind of Christianity, right? We've always been dealing with Christianities. There's never been just one Christianity.
No, never.
Right? So who gets to decide which Christianity is privileged and which Christianity is criminalized, right? Like, not you,
Yeah.
random Christian person. It won't be you. So,
I hope it's not me.
rather it be you than the people who are currently writing the terms. But anyway, like, I think we don't really fully understand the implications for this, right?
Mhm.
And I grew up in a Christian context where our agenda was to make everybody Christian. We thought that's what we had to do. We thought that's what the Great Commission mandated us to do. And history bears the scars of what happens when people are trying to impose that kind of, we know what happens. Blood runs through the streets, right? And so I think we ought to take that seriously. I also think, there's there's always, right? A financial, there's an economic link here, right? Like, what does the perpetuation of this kind of foreign policy, these kind of attitudes, what does that mean for kind of our everyday bottom lines? What does that mean for our kind of federal bottom lines? We're paying to do this. That means we're not paying to do that. The government is
Mhm.
not investing in that, right? And that disinvestment is going to have some real everyday concrete consequences for you and your life,
Mhm.
right? And so again, I think we need to connect the dots between the economic pain people are feeling right now and the choices our government makes around how we will spend our financial resources,
Mhm.
right? You mad about paying $5 at the pump? You mad about your eggs? Me too. I wonder why, right? These are our new economic realities, right?
Mhm.
Um, the complicity that the United States has in this kind of genocide, ongoing occupation, is directly connected to the economic pain I think everyday Americans are feeling, right? And so we need to connect those dots. This is not just about theology, not just about kind of foreign policy and kind of war and what. It's also about, to what degree do you have the resources to live your life,
Mhm.
right? And so that's why I think that this is the issue, right? Because it touches so many other issues, right? And that's why I think we need a bigger movement, because this involves literally everybody. It
Mhm.
should anyway.
It should. So, some people listening to this, they might be hearing us talking and be like, yeah, like, we gotta do better, and we gotta ask these big questions, but they might not actually know what it looks like in real life to have propaganda put towards them. They might know how to see it, firsthand, especially in their churches or whatever. Especially, you see a lot of this happening on like social media with influencers. You get influencer hijacking, and how
Mm,
easy it is where it's easier, instead of building someone up, they put a bunch of money towards someone that's already got a platform, and then they say, look, this person is on board with what we're doing, and how easy it is for, like, not just influencers but pastors as well of our church. So, like, could you share maybe an example of how you've seen Christian Zionism like show up in like everyday church life in ways people might not like immediately recognize it?
I think, I don't know if I want to call it a fetishizing. Maybe it's just a romanticizing of the Holy Land, right? Like, we're
Mhm.
just unable to have a real conversation about the political, the material, because we're so smitten with the fact that here is where Jesus walked, right? And I think fetishizing and romanticizing are just as dehumanizing as, writing off a whole region or demonizing a whole region, right? Like,
Mhm.
you're unable to see what's really going on because you've got these rose-colored glasses about the region and the holy nature of the region, right? How could we critique anything about the Holy Land? Well, wait a minute, right? So I think that's a lingering kind of feature of Christianity.
Mhm.
No matter whether you're in, again, an evangelical setting, a more conservative Christian setting, or in a more progressive one, there's still the
Mhm.
same kind of starry-eyed view of the Holy Land, which I think forecloses on any possibility of having a real messy conversation about what's going on, the violence, the disenfranchisement, the dispossession, the right. So that's like a something that sneaks up on you. I think that you don't call that Christian Zionism necessarily, but it's definitely socializing. It's forming Christians to think of that place in a particular way, and so then they can't think of it any other way, right? So I think that's one example. I think again the refusal, the hesitation around, the anxiety around thinking critically about the state of Israel is another way it shows up, right? Just the inability to even, because you worried about getting caught and being told that you're now, you're a bad human being, right? It's interesting that that's the case, even while many Christian institutions are still reading, say, the Bible in a deeply, I think, anti-Jewish way. So, we're still in the middle of the Easter season. It's still Eastertide, right? And we just had kind of Holy Week and blah, blah, blah. People still read the gospel, the Passion, for example, in a way that teeters on anti-Semitic notions of kind of Jewish life and identity at that time, right? People are still preaching, for lack of a better way to say it, a less crass way to say it, that Jews killed Jesus. People are still. So it's just interesting how incoherent this is, right? On the one hand, you can read the biblical text and read the account of Jewish Jesus saying this and that and the other thing in a way that's anti-Semitic, that's anti-Jewish, even while you have an Israeli flag flying in your sanctuary, right? So it just there's an incoherence here that I think also preserves Christian Zionism, right? The fact that you can do both of those things at once. That's exactly what Christian Zionism is. It's purporting to be a friend of Jews while plotting Jewish destruction at the very same time, right? So I think that that's an indication of Christian Zionism lurking in Christian spaces. I think this is related to the first point I was trying to make about the fetishizing of the land. There are still delegations to the Holy Land, right? Like people itching to go, and they're not thinking critically about, now who planned this trip? Who's inviting me? Who created this itinerary? Am I being, exposed to all kinds of propaganda? Like, am I being instrumentalized for the project of Zionism, right? I'm another Christian soldier being trained to maintain Zionism, right? That's Christian Zionism showing up in everyday churches, right? All under the guise of take a trip this summer to the place where Jesus walked, right? And there's no critical analysis about, there's one way you can visit Palestine to open your eyes to see the way, and there's another way you can visit where you can't even see the, I'm like, how
Yeah.
did you see the wall that was there? Like, what, how are you, right? But I'm like, but the wall was everywhere, y'all. So I don't know how you missed it. You couldn't have missed it, right?
No.
So anyway, I think the kind of tourist Zionism industry is also showing up in everyday churches, and people don't know they're being trained to be Christian Zionists when they sign up for these trips, right? So yeah, there are all of these subtle ways. It's not explicit. It's not a Mike Huckabee, right? It's not Hexeth. It's not, but it's, a kinder, gentler Christian Zionism, right? And that's the more kind of, I think that's the more damaging version, because you don't know you're in it until you're deep in it and you can't figure out how to get out of it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I just recorded an episode on cults, but more importantly, the thought reform that happens within cults, which can happen to anybody. You don't have to be in a cult to have thought reform happen like this. And the most important thing is that it happens over time, and it changes the way you think about things, and you don't even realize how it's, how you're being changed in that way.
Right.
And basically what you're explaining is along those same terms, is like that. I do kind of want to switch gears just a little bit. It'll
Hmm.
be kind of parallel here, but this next little question I had for you is that there's a movement that has immense sway over the current presidential administration. It is called the New Apostolic Reformation, NAR.
Hmm.
A lot of people have heard about this. And it is a movement that was born out of the late 90s that has garnered plenty of criticism, like gatekeeping the direct word of God, weaponizing the idea of demons and hell, breeding false prophets, and having plans to dominate nations through political and cultural control through an ideology called the Seven Mountain Mandate.
Hmm.
So I'm sure you're familiar with the NAR, but how do they come into the picture and how does it coincide with Zionism?
Yeah, this is, I'm grateful for the question because here's where we get to ponder how there might be some cracks and fissures and places of incoherence in the kind of Christian right coalition. So NAR folks um, are most concerned about the conversion of the United States, about Christianity and Christian dogma, a certain kind of Christian dogma, let me say, governing every segment of society. As you said, the Seven Mountain Mandate. Of course, there is the impulse also to extrapolate and say, that means that once the United States has fully surrendered to Jesus Christ, we can then spread the gospel all over the world. So this idea that we would export that theological worldview to other places aligns with the Christian Zionist notion of, we're trying to fulfill God's word. Everything we do has to have some connection to fulfilling prophecy. And I would say that NAR folks are deeply, this is a gross generalization, of course, deeply concerned about, for lack of a better way to say, America first. Now, that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that NAR prophets are not doing conferences in Brazil or trying to export, anti-LGBTQ sentiment to African countries. I mean, all of that is still true. And I would say that some NAR folk don't even think that, some evangelical leaders are sufficiently Christian enough. You know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? Like they might be right to the right of the right kind of thing, kind
Uh-huh.
of thing. And so that's why I say there might be some infighting that we can take advantage of, that we can exploit on the left, right? They don't all agree on all the things. So I think you can't necessarily say that every NAR person you run into is also Christian Zionist. And clearly there's some overlap and relationship between Christian Zionist ideology and NAR ideology, for
Mm-hmm.
sure. Uh, I think in terms of the danger in the whole religious landscape, when you have NAR folks moving closer to the center and you got Christian Zionists moving, Christianity is cooked. I mean, we need to figure this out because the activity of both of these movements combined, we're this is going to be an uphill battle
Yeah.
to push these folks back to the margins,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, all of it is about wielding political power in the name of Jesus. All of it is about coercive power as a holy right? That
Mm-hmm.
what it means to follow Jesus is to move like you're in charge and you have a certain kind of authority. Um, there's probably some relationship between how Christian Zionists read the Bible in a literal sense, in a sense of like the Bible is chronicling a certain kind of historical timeline, right? There's some similarity between NAR movement and Christian Zionism movement in terms of the approach to interpreting the Bible. Sure.
Yeah. I think you kind of addressed some of that next point that I had, so I'm going to skip right over and go to this next little thing. So, as a white man who grew up in a religious system that kept me blinded to the parts of history that didn't fit neatly within the white man's narrative, I've been waking up to quite a bit of stuff, like people groups who have been routinely been marginalized and demonized, and how they've been yelling from the rooftops for generations. One of the biggest wake-up calls was, of course, October 7th, like I had mentioned, and then learning about the systemic oppression against the Palestinian people. That, of course, opened up a whole can of learning about indigenous people groups, as well as Black history and now theological movements like the liberation theology, like I also mentioned before. I've been progressively connecting the dots and seeing how white supremacy is interwoven into the fabric of this country, and putting in the work to remove the blinders put on by the greedy capitalist bourgeoisie. I know you're hearing me say all this and you're probably thinking, great, I've connected the dots a while ago. Waking up was a fairly lonely experience for me, as many of my counterparts and community around me haven't woken up yet. Now, many people are waking up, though, and people who haven't lived under the oppression previously, like people like me and some of my friends, the less control the Epstein class has on the masses, the more they crack the whip as they desperately try to maintain any semblance of control they have left. How do you see us bringing these disenfranchised folks into the fold of class solidarity, even when there are still differing ideologies and principles? Kind of like we were talking about, like there's still people within the NAR areas and even conservative ways and progressive ways of viewing, Zionism and support for Israel. Like how do we still find this kind of class solidarity against this, transnationalist class?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I was having a conversation just yesterday with somebody about this. And, one of the things I said to me is a barrier to this is the potency of the enduring nature of the myth that becoming a member of the Epstein class is desirable and possible for everyone, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is the American dream myth, right? So it's what maintains our ability to critique the billionaire class and vote in a member of the billionaire class, right? Because, well, if he ran a business, or well, if he is this real estate mogul, or well, if he must be able
Mm-hmm.
to run a nation, right? And I don't like Elon Musk, but I sure wouldn't mind being him,
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing, right? It's that. So, the pastor in me, the religious nerd in me is like, we need to do some work to excavate that thinking from our kind of mass consciousness, right? The idea that if we can I would be the right kind of billionaire. If I could just, if I could just achieve the American dream and become wealthy, I wouldn't be wealthy like these folks are being wealthy. Without recognizing that being so removed from the everyday life of the folk who are in the 90% or whatever shapes your desires, your preferences, your dreams, your right. And so you're not going to be the same person that you are today if you had access to endless financial resources, right? So I'm saying all of this to say, I think we as a nation are struggling to develop a class solidarity because we still want to get into the 1%. And so
Mm-hmm.
there still needs to be this competition between us down here, right? So while we're all fighting to have a foothold on the mountain to 1% status, the people who are already on top of the mountain are just like watching us destroy ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
So people don't want to, I don't know that this is a popular sermon, Mark, but I remember Jesus saying,
Preach it.
if you really want to follow me, sell everything you got.
There you go. I love it.
Not because you want to be like poor and unable to eat and unable to, he's not sanctifying poverty, I think. What he's doing is saying these kinds of things will encumber you. You won't be able to engage in the risky kind of love that I'm modeling.
Preach
If
it.
if you're worried about how to keep your, 10 cars or whatever, you're worried about how to, right? These things shape our desires. our ambitions in a way that is contrary to the gospel values, the gospel dreams, the gospel ambitions, right? So I think we need to reckon with this. If everybody's trying to get rich, then how will we really establish solidarity with each other? Because we're all competing with each other. At the end of the day, I won't mind. And so I think that gets in the way of the class solidarity movement that we need. So it's a matter of making the compelling argument that, hey, don't y'all see? We are all experiencing economic pain. And the solution is not make it so that my pain goes away so I can continue my ascent to the top of the mountain. Like, we need to be less, I don't want to call it selfish. I mean, I think wanting your material needs to be met is not selfish. But I think that what runs rampant in the United States is wanting not only your material needs to be met, but you want to be able to have largesse. You want to be able to have endless financial resources. And we don't talk enough about how it is that you can get that level of wealth. It has to come through exploitation. It has to come through hoarding resources on the one hand and depriving people on the other. It has to. Right? That's the conversation we don't want to have. But if we had it, then we would unify around our collective discontent that we are merely cogs in the wheel of wealth hoarding, by a few people, right? But as long as the authoritarian regime, say, can maintain the story in our heads that they're not the enemy, but instead my fellow neighbor who's also going for the same dollar I'm going for is my enemy, right? They will always win. That's why I think, as you said at the top of this conversation, a critique of capitalism is vital, right? To winning any of these demands. An analysis apart from critique of capitalism is incomplete analysis. But I think so many people in the United States are still bought in to capitalism, still bought in. So, I mean, what do we do about that, right? That's the rub. We still think that capitalism is like, what Jesus preached or something like that, right? I mean, in many Christian circles, it's like, this is the holy way to arrange our economic. It's like, what? That has nothing to do. In fact, what Jesus was saying was, we're going to take these 5 fish and 2 loaves and we're going to feed everybody. That's not capitalism. But again, I think the church has been complicit in sanctifying capitalism as if it is a natural extension of the gospel. It's not. So yeah, that's what I could go on all day about about that. I have strong feelings.
So I reconnected my camera, but it won't let me change the camera unless I leave. So I'm just going to leave really fast and I'll come back in. So just stay put. I'll be right back in.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. I swear this program gets slower and slower every time I use it.
These devices, I tell you what, I don't know if it's like the gremlins inside that they're trying to, my machines are working against me. I don't know what's happening.
All right. So let me ask this last one, this little kind of parallel question, the last little thing here. So for Christians listening who feel conflicted, uninformed, or afraid to talk about Palestine or Zionism, what is a responsible first step that they can take and learn and engage without causing harm? Like trying to find a way to get people out of their comfort zone and not like with like anti-Semitic tropes or anything.
Well, one step, I think a first step could be to get to the bottom of what you're afraid of, or what anxieties are holding you back from leaning into engaging in a conversation about Palestine, leaning in to explore what's worthy of critique as it relates to the state of Israel, right? Like getting to the root of that. Is it I'm going to lose my Jewish friends, I think. Is it, I won't feel like I belong in my church anymore because everybody else is on something, is like, what is it? Because I think the solution has to be connected to resolving that hiccup or hang up or hesitation, right? If it has to do with not knowing what that's going to do relationally to your friendships or, collegial relationships with Jews in your life, then get connected to the movement that is afoot among Jews who are in solidarity with Palestine. Get yourself introduced to a Jewish framework that absolutely allows for and actually mandates this solidarity, right? Getting plugged into understanding that Jewish communities are not monoliths, right? If it has to do with, being concerned about falling out with your pastor or falling out with your, right? So then it's like, okay, how can I, get connected to a broader Christian community, again, of people who have taken a couple of steps along the path of evolution, right? They used to be where you are, and now they're a little bit further, maybe they're not all the way, like me, I'm like, free Palestine, arrest me, whatever, right? Maybe they're not all the way there, but they've moved. So let me find the other people who've just moved a couple of steps, and talk to them about that process and see if they will accompany me as I try to move, right? It's also about changing your, I don't know if it's like news sources, but also your resource list, right? Like what voices aren't you hearing, right? Either because the algorithm or whatever, you're not hearing Christian pastors talk about their anti-Zionist evolutions. You're not hearing the collaborations going on between Jews and Christians as we all try to disrupt Zionism. What's our piece of Zionism to disrupt? Jews doing their work, Christians doing their work, right? It's just really easy to be isolated. And the first step is to get out of isolation, right? To, log into that Christians for a Free Palestine webinar, right? Just you and your headphones, and you don't have to tell anybody, but then you get plugged into other people who are like trying to figure it out too, right? It's listening to podcasts like this one. It's, it's watching, getting your news about what's going on in Palestine from a different source. How about from from Palestinian journalists, right? It's like changing your diet is what this is analogous to, right? How can you be ingesting different perspectives on this? And shameless plug for Christians for a Free Palestine. I mean, our method is we don't change as individuals, well, in isolation. We change in the context of community. So we've got solidarity circles where you get together with another small group of people and you're struggling and weighing it together. Or we're going to do this action, but we're not asking you to come by yourself. Get some people in your local community and y'all all come together, right? Our philosophy is that we were formed to be Christian Zionists in community. And so if we want to be formed in a different way, we got to do that in community as well.
Oh, I love that. And congregations, can even do this too. Like you're looking at churches as a whole, they already do small groups. A lot of churches do.
Yeah.
It's just like another way of doing that. Find people that are actively, trying to find this better way forward. So I think as an applicable way that you can apply to your life, I think that's a great way, I think the word choice you use is, a small group. Find those people that, even if it's just a couple of people that you can talk to about this and discuss of how you can broaden your scope about how you can impact maybe your friends and family and allow them to think larger than what they currently are. I think that's beautiful. I know you mentioned your nonprofit here, but maybe you can share even a little bit about that with this. But like, have you heard any like stories or anything that's impacted you, like stories or communities that really give you hope that another way actually is possible?
A couple things. One is I was invited to co-teach a course on understanding Christian Zionism for a synagogue community recently. One of my local synagogues. I'm already friends, comrades with the rabbi, and he asked me and another rabbi to co-teach this course. And it got so good to us that we were like, we need to do this again. We need to take this show on the road. The idea that we would bring Jewish folks to the table to understand Christian Zionism and bring Christian folk to the table so that they can understand, first of all, Judaism, period, because there's a lot of
There's a lot of misinterpretation of
wild,
yeah.
right, wild, right. So to understand Judaism and understand Jewish Zionism, right? This kind of cross-fertilization is really giving me hope, right? Because these systems of domination and oppression stay in place as long as we're not talking to each other, as long as we're not comparing notes, as long as we're not strategizing together, right? And so Christian Zionism doesn't want Jews and Christians to be talking like this, right? And so we are taking this show on the road. We did the course in person for that one synagogue. We're now going to do an online course and invite Jews and Christians to come, and we're gonna talk shop together, right? So that's giving me hope. There's more of that happening. And then what if we could have Jews and Christians and Muslims
There you
talking
go.
about, and we could have Palestinians leading that,
I love that.
right? So that's giving me hope. That's giving me hope. I think Christians for a Free Palestine. I mean, when we first started, we didn't know who was going to be interested in what. Would Christians be too afraid? And there is interest and growing interest among Christians and people who we call Christian adjacent. So people who maybe were raised Christian, but they're not involved in Christian community anymore, either because they grew out of it or trauma or whatever, right? But they're still people of faith. They still want to be part of, right? So many of those folk are finding their political home and their spiritual home in the Palestine solidarity movement. And that gives me hope, because I don't want a faith that is not attending to the political implications of that faith. And the fact that there's so many people interested in connecting those dots and not simply saying, oh, I just believe Jesus is, and that it's not a partisan. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And so that gives me hope. That gives me hope. I think it's still going to be a hard battle. It's still going to be a hard battle.
Definitely will be.
But that gives me hope. Yeah.
I'm glad it gives you hope, because it gives me hope too. I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah.
I think our time is just about coming up here. If people want to hear more about you or find out more about you, where can they find you?
I am on social media everywhere but X, because didn't want to hang out there anymore. So you can find me on Instagram and Thread at the letter O, Holy Shift. Don't forget the S in shift. Holy Shift on Instagram and on Threads. You can find me on Facebook under my name, Naomi Washington-Leapheart. I've got a YouTube channel, and so you can either go on YouTube and search for my name and then the channel comes up, or if you use Bitly, the kind of link shortener, you can type Bitly /watch NWL. Bitly/watch NWL to get to my YouTube channel.
Right on. And of course, Christians for a Free Palestine, you guys have social media accounts for those as well, and you should be able to find it through everything that she told you to. So Reverend Naomi, thank you so much. Honestly, this everything you said, I'm just like I'm learning stuff. Like I'm just right there with you as well. Really, thank you so much for giving the time to come on the show and talk. And I hope some people are able to hear you and really, move something in their lives.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be in conversation. And I look forward to engaging. I see you out there. Right? In the movement.
Oh, yeah. All right. Well, see you later, and we'll see you all in the next episode.